They put up the first table for a good reason. The temple leaders had a problem. Roman currency was the cash of the land, complete with the face of the emperor, and they needed a non-face stamped Jewish coins for the temple tax and for the offerings. Plus, with all the pilgrims coming in for the Passover, carrying different types of currencies from throughout the lands, putting a simple money-changing table on the temple grounds would be hospitable, the right thing to do. Over there in the corner, out of the way. The first table went up simply enough. After a while, if there's an exchange table, there might also be a table to sell some doves. Doves for sacrifice, just some small doves. Nothing too extreme. It makes no sense to exchange the money here at the temple, but then have to leave the temple, get the animal, and then come back and return to the temple. So another table went up to sell some doves. After a while, if selling one type of animal is good, then selling multiple kinds must be even better. People like having choices and showing off their wealth and devotion to God with the type of sacrificial animals that they can afford. Why just sell some doves if people can afford cattle and sheep? And if profit can be made, all the better. That's just a win-win. After a while, what was left was a full-blown marketplace with the facade of a temple. And after a while, everyone forgot how it all started and took the marketplace temple as the status quo. But putting up that first table was so simple. Like those money changer tables, whenever we lose sight of the essential and important things in life, it typically happens gradually, over time, with good reasons and the best intentions. Today's gospel can be one of the more uncomfortable lessons that we hear. It's because it's a side of Jesus that we don't usually talk about. This confrontational Jesus is the same Jesus who tells us, "Peace I leave with you, my own peace I give to you." The Jesus who says, "A new command I give you, love one another. As I have loved you, you must love one another." The same Jesus who says, "As the Father has loved me, so I love you. Abide in my love." And that's just from the Gospel of John. In the other Gospels, this is the same Jesus who tells us, "Blessed are the peacemakers," to love our enemies, to turn the other cheek. So what is Jesus doing with a whip in hand? In the Gospel of John, at the beginning of Jesus' public ministry, we see a zealous, angry, whip-bearing, assertive Jesus flipping tables and driving the marketplace out of the temple. The synoptic Gospels, Matthew, Mark, and Luke, well, they use the cleansing of the temple as the precipitating event for Jesus' arrest. It comes close to the end of Jesus' public ministry. But this Sunday, we have switched from Mark's gospel to John's gospel. And John places the cleansing of the temple really close to the beginning. I think it's in chapter 2, right? It's like God is saying, "I'm about to do this new thing for the entire world, but before we get started, we have to have some self-examination at home first. Some spiritual spring cleaning, if you will." And too often we hear this part of Jesus' story and think, well, what tables do I need to flip over? for Jesus' name in the world. We look at everyone else's tables and think, I could flip over that table. Too often we see this story as permission to use force. Too often we use it to give our anger a pass. Well, I can be angry because Jesus was angry. Anger in the name of righteousness. But before we go flipping over other people's tables, the season of Lent invites us to take the planks out of our own eyes first and examine the temples of our hearts. In seminary, I took several environmental ethics courses, and during those classes, I learned of the irony of the success of the Smokey the Bear campaigns. Who's heard of Smokey the Bear? Yeah? Right. Smokey the Bear is one of the longest running public environmental awareness efforts, and most of us are familiar with the slogan, right? Only you can prevent forest fires. Unlike many other environmental awareness efforts, this one actually worked, and it helped change the actions of many people. In fact, it worked too well. And for a time, all fire was seen as detrimental and should be suppressed. And so what happened? There were no fires, and the forest grew and grew without regular small fires, filling them to the brim with fuel for the massive, out-of-control wildfires that we started seeing more frequently. Now we recognize that although it looks violent and destructive, contained, periodic, proportional fires are actually really good for the environment. They clear out the debris. They make space for new growth. They redistribute nutrients and resources back into the soil. Regular, controlled burns keep an ecosystem healthy. I invite us to see the season of Lent as the cyclical, controlled burn maintenance of our spiritual lives. It's the season where we go with Jesus in the temple of our hearts. We look around, we see what's going on honestly, and we drive out the parts that are no longer helping us stay connected to the God of love and peace. We make space for God to do something new in our hearts. You see, in our lives, we set up tables in the temple of our hearts. Tables that turn our focus from the God of unconditional love to lies. Lies, tables that tell us, I don't need my community, I can be self-sufficient. Or, if only I had just a little bit more, then I would feel safe and at peace. Or, if I just work a little bit harder, if I get a little bit more recognition, then I'll feel whole. Or if I just get that bigger, nicer, faster, better, fill in the blank, I'll find what I've been missing. These are the tables that we set up in the temples of our heart. Gradually, we turn our focus away from loving God and loving our neighbor. This is called sin. Now, I think a lot of us think of sin as a list of things that we aren't supposed to do. And if that's the way you think of sin, that's okay. But I invite you to redefine the way you look at that word sin. Redefine it as the notion of disordered affection, attachments, or loves. You see, sin is where we prioritize the love of other things above the love of God. Like we love money so much that it becomes our driving factor in all our decisions and how we go about the world, and that becomes even more important than our love of God. Does that make sense? These disordered loves manifest themselves in thoughts, words, and actions that serve as a stumbling block or hindrance to a deeper relationship with God. And it's important to point out that most of the time, these loves or attachments, when they're rightly ordered, when God comes first, well, they are good, God-given gifts. So each year, the season of Lent is when we collectively, as a community and individually, slow down to check the order of our loves and attachments in our lives. We take the time to slow down and see where the manifestation of these disorders is slowly starting to creep in and set up those tables. During this season, I invite us to go somewhere quiet. Sit down with that zealous, table-flipping, powerful Jesus who loves and deeply cares for us. With him, look and see what tables we have set up in the temple of our souls. How have we turned the temple of our life into a marketplace? Look at the tables of greed or jealousy, of love of things over people, the tables of productivity without rest and Sabbath, the tables of indifference and apathy. Manage this controlled burn with care by remembering to be kind to ourselves. It's not an exercise just to beat yourself up over and over again. Kindness is essential. Remember, those tables were set up subtly, one by one, with good intentions. And looking over those tables with Jesus, we take his hand and flip over those tables together. We can take up that whip and reorder our temples. And when the dust settles and stillness sets in, we find the temple is ready to begin again. A temple made with one main purpose: to love and be loved by God.